Welcome to this Frogplum audiobook series. If you find these chapters helpful, remember to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you don't miss the next part. Feel free to share this with someone who might need encouragement today, and save the playlist so you can follow the journey start to finish. This audiobook is for education and reflection only. Now let's begin. Chapter 17. Control the first 30 seconds. In business communication, the first 30 seconds quietly shape everything that follows. Before your idea is evaluated, your presence is assessed. Before your logic is weighed, your composure is felt. Before your value is discussed, your stability is tested. Most people do not realize this is happening, but decision makers do. In professional environments, people listen fast, not because they are impatient, but because they are trained to filter. In the opening moments of a meeting, pitch, or presentation, listeners are asking themselves a few silent questions. Does this person know why they are here? Do they sound prepared? Do they feel grounded? These questions are answered before the content truly begins. Many professionals treat the opening as a warm-up. They speak casually. They ease into the topic. They assume credibility will be earned later. In business, later often never comes. Credibility is often assigned early and adjusted only slightly afterward. This is especially true in environments where time is limited and stakes are high. Investor pitches, boardroom briefings, executive updates, high-level introductions. In these settings, the opening is not a formality. It is positioning. Strong business communicators understand that the first 30 seconds are not about impressing. They are about orienting. They establish context before detail. They establish intent before explanation. They establish calm before complexity. This creates a foundation that everything else rests on. When the opening is unfocused, the room becomes cautious. People listen defensively. They wait for mistakes. When the opening is clear and composed, the room relaxes. People shift from evaluation to understanding. This shift matters. Many speakers begin by explaining background information. They describe history. They add context. They explain how things became complicated. They believe this builds understanding. In reality, it often builds confusion. Effective leaders reverse the order. They begin with relevance. They answer the unspoken question first. Why does this matter right now? This does not require dramatic language or bold claims. It requires precision. A simple, grounded opening sentence can change the entire dynamic of a room. It signals that you are not searching for footing. You already have it. Another critical function of the first 30 seconds is emotional calibration. Your tone sets the emotional temperature. If you sound rushed, the room feels pressure. If you sound scattered, the room becomes skeptical. If you sound steady, the room settles. People unconsciously mirror emotional cues. This is why experienced executives often sound calm from the first sentence. They are not warming up publicly. They arrive oriented. Control of the opening also protects you internally. When you know exactly how you will begin, your body stabilizes. Your breathing slows. Your pace evens out. You stop reacting to the environment and start leading it. This is especially important for people who tend to feel pressure at the start of conversations. The opening becomes an anchor. Another overlooked aspect of the first 30 seconds is boundary setting. A structured opening creates a structured conversation. A loose opening invites drift. When you begin clearly, you signal how the discussion will unfold. People adjust their expectations. They listen differently. This is why strong communicators rarely improvise the opening. They design it, not word for word, but intention by intention. They know what the listener must understand before anything else makes sense. The first 30 seconds do not need to be perfect. They need to be deliberate. When you control them, you shape the rest of the interaction. When you leave them to chance, you give up authority before the conversation even starts. In business, leadership often begins before the content does. Tonight, tomorrow. Micro practice. 1. Before your next meeting or pitch, write down your first 2 sentences. 2. Make sure they establish context and relevance, not background. 3. Deliver them slowly and clearly. 4. Pause briefly before continuing. 5. Observe how control at the beginning affects attention and engagement. Authority often enters the room early. Those who respect the opening earn everything that follows. Chapter 18. Repetition builds trust when used correctly. In business communication, repetition is often misunderstood. Many people avoid repeating ideas because they fear sounding simple or unoriginal. Others repeat without intention and dilute their message. Used incorrectly, repetition feels lazy. Used correctly, it creates trust. Research in communication and decision-making has consistently shown that familiarity increases perceived credibility. Ideas that are heard more than once, in a consistent form, are easier to process and easier to trust. This does not mean repeating the same sentence again and again. It means reinforcing the same core idea through consistent framing. Strong business leaders understand this instinctively. If you listen to experienced CEOs during earnings calls, you will notice a pattern. They return to the same key message repeatedly, even when answering different questions. They do not improvise a new position each time. They anchor responses to a stable narrative. This consistency reassures investors, not because the answers are identical, but because the direction is. In contrast, leaders who vary their framing too much create uncertainty. Even when the facts are strong, inconsistency raises questions. Repetition, when intentional, signals alignment. It tells the listener that your thinking is settled. This principle is also visible in negotiations. Negotiators who calmly restate their position without emotional variation often gain leverage over time. They do not escalate. They do not argue. They repeat the core point. This repetition creates pressure without confrontation. The other side realizes the position is not shifting. In leadership communication, repetition plays a similar role. Teams trust leaders who reinforce priorities consistently, not leaders who change emphasis every week. Clarity compounds through repetition. Another reason repetition builds trust is cognitive load. Business environments are noisy. People process large amounts of information quickly. When a core message is repeated in different contexts, it stands out. It becomes familiar. It becomes reliable. Studies in communication psychology often describe this as processing fluency. Ideas that are easier to process feel more credible, even when listeners are not consciously aware of why. Repetition increases fluency. However, repetition must be disciplined. Repeating too much detail creates fatigue. Repeating the wrong message reinforces the wrong signal. Strong communicators repeat only what matters. They identify one or two core ideas and return to them deliberately. They allow supporting details to change, but the foundation stays the same. This is why effective pitches often feel simple, even when the business is complex. The complexity exists beneath the surface. The message remains stable. Repetition also strengthens authority under pressure. When challenged, returning calmly to your core point communicates control. It shows you are not being pulled off position. This is not stubbornness, it is clarity. People trust clarity. In business, trust rarely comes from novelty. It comes from consistency. When listeners hear the same clear message across time, contexts, and questions, they stop evaluating whether you believe it. They assume you do. That assumption is powerful. Tonight, tomorrow. Micro-practice. 1. Identify one core idea you want people to associate with you professionally. 2. Practice stating it clearly in one sentence. 3. In your next meeting, return to that idea at least twice in different contexts. 4. Keep the wording consistent. 5. Notice how repetition stabilizes the conversation. Trust is not built by saying more. It is built by saying what matters, consistently. Chapter 19. Consistency creates authority over time. In business, authority is rarely built in a single conversation. It is built across repeated interactions. People do not decide whether to trust you once. They decide again and again, often without realizing it. This is why consistency matters more than brilliance. Professionals who sound clear one day and uncertain the next create confusion. Professionals who communicate with steady tone, stable framing, and predictable judgment earn trust over time. This pattern is widely observed in leadership environments. Executives who are trusted tend to sound similar across different contexts. Their tone in meetings resembles their tone in presentations. Their answers in difficult conversations resemble their answers in calm ones. This does not mean they are repetitive or robotic. It means their internal standards are stable. Consistency reassures people that they know who they are dealing with. In business, unpredictability in communication often creates risk, not excitement. Risk. Investors, partners, and teams do not expect perfection. They expect reliability. Reliability shows up in how you speak. When your communication style shifts dramatically depending on pressure, audience, or mood, people begin to question your judgment. They wonder which version of you is real. Consistency removes that doubt. This is why experienced leaders develop a recognizable way of speaking, not a script, a pattern. They know how they open conversations. They know how they answer questions. They know how they close discussions. These patterns act as anchors. Another reason consistency builds authority is cognitive ease. People do not need to relearn how to interpret you each time you speak. They know what to expect. That expectation creates comfort. Comfort creates openness. Openness creates influence. In contrast, inconsistent communicators force listeners to stay alert. They listen defensively. They wait for shifts. This drains trust. Consistency also protects you under pressure. When you rely on habits rather than improvisation, your communication holds together when stress increases. You are not reinventing your delivery every time. You are returning to something familiar. This is why preparation, earlier in the book, matters. Preparation allows consistency. Consistency allows authority. It is also why leaders who survive long-term scrutiny often sound calm, even when the message is difficult. They are not adjusting their identity to the moment. They are expressing it. Consistency does not mean rigidity. You can adapt content while keeping delivery stable. Your tone can remain steady even when circumstances change. Your pace can remain controlled even when urgency exists. This is what people respond to. Over time, consistency compounds. People begin to associate your voice with stability, your presence with reliability, your words with intention. Authority becomes something others assign to you without being asked, not because you demanded it, because you earned it gradually. Tonight, tomorrow, micro-practice. 1. Reflect on how you usually sound in professional conversations. 2. Identify one aspect you want to keep consistent, such as pace, tone, or structure. 3. Apply it deliberately in your next 2 business interactions. 4. Resist the urge to adjust your style based on reaction alone. 5. Observe how consistency changes how people engage with you. Authority is not built by intensity. It is built by steadiness repeated over time. Chapter 20. Make your presence predictable. By this point in the book, a pattern should be clear. Authority in business speaking is not built through tricks, volume, or performance. It is built through predictability. Predictability does not mean being boring. It means being reliable. When people interact with you professionally, they begin to form expectations, not just about what you will say, but about how you will say it. Those expectations shape trust. Business leaders who are respected long-term tend to sound familiar over time. Their tone is steady, their pacing is controlled, their structure is recognizable. People know what kind of presence they are walking into. This is not accidental. Predictable presence reduces uncertainty. Uncertainty increases cognitive load. Cognitive load makes people cautious. When your presence is predictable, people stop spending energy evaluating you. They spend that energy engaging with the content. This shift matters in leadership. Teams function better when communication feels stable. Investors listen differently when delivery is consistent. Partners negotiate more openly when they know what to expect. Predictability creates psychological safety in business contexts. Not safety in the emotional sense, but safety in the operational sense. People know where the ground is. Unpredictable communicators create friction even when intentions are good. Their tone shifts, their pace changes, their framing varies from conversation to conversation. This forces others to stay alert instead of collaborative. Predictable presence does the opposite. It lowers resistance. Another reason predictability strengthens authority is attribution. Over time, people associate your presence with outcomes. If conversations with you are consistently clear, calm, and structured, people begin to trust your involvement. They may not articulate why, they simply feel it. This is how authority often forms quietly. Predictable presence also protects you internally. When you know how you show up, you do not need to reinvent yourself each time you speak. You rely on habits instead of reactions. This is especially important under pressure. When stress rises, predictable habits prevent collapse. You are not searching for control. You are returning to it. Predictability does not eliminate flexibility. It creates a stable frame within which flexibility can exist. Your words may change. Your posture does not. Your message may adapt. Your tone remains grounded. This consistency makes you easier to trust. In business, trust is rarely about charisma. It is about reduced risk. People trust what feels stable. As you move forward, the goal is not to sound impressive. It is to sound like yourself in a controlled, deliberate way. The same presence in meetings, the same presence in pitches, the same presence in difficult conversations. Over time, people stop testing you. They stop bracing. They start listening. That is when authority becomes part of your identity rather than something you perform. Tonight, tomorrow, micro-practice. 1. Reflect on how you want people to describe your presence in business settings. 2. Choose 3 words that capture it. 3. In your next conversation, align your pace and tone with those words. 4. Repeat this consistently across interactions. 5. Notice how predictability changes how people engage with you. Authority is not built by surprise. It is built by reliability, repeated. Epilogue. What authority really is. By now, it should be clear that authority is not something you switch on when needed. It is something you build quietly through how you show up over time. Throughout this book, we did not focus on sounding impressive. We focused on sounding clear. We did not focus on dominating rooms. We focused on stabilizing them. That distinction matters. Many people chase confidence as if it were a personality trait. In reality, confidence in business communication is often the byproduct of preparation, restraint, and consistency. When you speak clearly, people relax. When you remain calm, people listen. When you are predictable, people trust. Authority grows in that space. You may have noticed that none of the chapters asked you to become louder, faster, or more aggressive. That was intentional. Business environments reward people who reduce noise, not increase it. Over time, the practices in this book are meant to change how conversations feel around you. Meetings become more focused, questions become more precise, discussions move forward instead of looping. Not because you forced outcomes, because your communication made outcomes easier. Authority is often invisible while it is forming. People do not announce when they begin to trust you. They simply stop questioning your presence. They stop bracing. They stop testing. They begin to rely on you. This is what real authority looks like: quiet, stable, unforced. If there is one idea to carry forward, it is this. Your voice is not just a tool for sharing ideas. It is a signal. Every pause, every sentence, every ending tells people what to expect from you. When that signal is steady, authority follows. Author's note: why this book exists. This book was written for people who know they have something to say, but have felt their voice work against them instead of for them. Not because they lacked intelligence, not because they lacked ambition, but because speaking clearly under pressure is a skill that is rarely taught and often misunderstood. In business, communication is not just expression, it is trust building. I wrote this book because too many capable people lose opportunities not due to weak ideas, but due to how those ideas are delivered. Meetings where intentions are misread, pitches where confidence is questioned, leadership moments where presence matters more than content. This audiobook is not about becoming someone else. It is about removing the habits that get in your way. There is no single style of authority. There is no perfect voice. But there are patterns that consistently build trust, and there are patterns that quietly erode it. My goal was to make those patterns visible, not to overwhelm, not to impress, but to clarify. Everything in this book is meant to be practiced in real conversations, in real meetings, with real stakes. If you take one thing from this work, let it be this. Authority is not about control, it is about reliability. When people know what kind of presence you bring, they listen differently. They engage more openly. They trust more easily. That is not power. That is responsibility. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. This was the final part of this audiobook series. If you feel someone you know could benefit from listening, please share it with them. And do not forget to like this audiobook and turn on notifications for future releases.